Good afternoon to our CLA family members, clients, community partners, and friends. Welcome back to our live stream. We sincerely hope that you are continuing to stay safe and healthy at this time. Today, we are going to be talking about Main Street lending and relevant PPP updates, which continue to evolve and we continue to learn more. We've got Todd Sprang, Jack, and Rick Kruger here to walk through some updates as well as answer your questions. So welcome back to the three of you.
Hey, Leslie.
We appreciate all of your questions and interaction that have come through our inbox at livestream@claconnect.com. The questions are wonderful and we are monitoring and responding to them daily. So please keep them coming both throughout the session today and as follow-ups, and we'll continue to address as many as we can while we're live with you today. We would also like to remind you that we have a COVID-19 landing page at claconnect.com where we continue to provide up-to-date information about these programs, as well as tools, articles, and all sorts of great resources and ways for you to continue to connect with us and contact us for more specific consultation. So with that, I would like to start with Todd today. Todd, I would love it if you could provide any updates you have on Main Street lending. We have heard it's been off to a slower start than expected, and I'd just love to know what you can tell us about it.
Sure, I can do that, Leslie. It's true that that program is off to a slower start than I think most borrowers had hoped. And also, I think the Federal Reserve was expecting that the program would have a more immediate impact. So what are some of the reasons behind that, and what are some of the common questions I get? The common questions are, where can I find a lender that's participating in the Main Street program? And there's no list that I'm aware of. And even if there were a list of registered lenders, I'm not sure everybody is actively involved in the program that even is registered at this time, that they're still evaluating. I think the other question that I typically get from borrowers is, with respect to Main Street lending, when they ask their bank about the program, either they aren't aware of the program very much or they aren't participating. They say they're not participating. And what's causing this? I think the program works for a narrow band of borrowers. Like some examples that I've heard where it does work is maybe the oil industry or those that are linked to business travel and hospitality, where they have some long-term recovery. It's going to be a longer term than the others. The other reason is I think that the bankers have analyzed the program terms and they're just not thrilled. The risk reward isn't there at this point. So unlike the PPP, so in that program, the risk reward was there. And then you see, even here at the last days of the program, lenders are still making even some small dollar loans that don't really generate that much income for them, but they're still actively participating. There just isn't that kind of, I'll say, excitement or around this program at this point. And then some other factors, I think borrowers look for a way that, say, the priority facility could be used to refinance some existing debt. And when you look at what needs to happen to do that, because the Main Street lender can't refinance their own debt with it or their own loans with it, that creates some relationship issues where you have to change deposit relationships and things. And I also think then that lenders are finding ways to suggest customary arrangements that are outside of Main Street. And there's still structural issues that I know I've talked about in the past that are still causing an issue. So I think overall also there's a disconnect between what the borrower's understanding of the Main Street facilities are and what it is. So I advise the following in this scenario is that start with determining your cash needs, especially looking out over the next 12 to 18 months. And if you need help with that, I know we at CLA have capabilities, and CLA intuition can be used for that purpose. So that might be a good place to start if you need a start. Second, compare those needs to the Main Street terms. And I know the Main Street terms are long and change. So if you need assistance with that, we can help you. Contact a CLA representative and we can get you in touch with somebody that can help you. And then last, I think discuss your needs with your lender, because they might be able to find those alternative arrangements that they're finding something that works for you that's outside Main Street but accomplishes your goals.
Yeah, I think those are great pieces of advice, Todd, because a lot of people are really starting to come out of the dip or the V that they have seen. And I think modeling their needs and what that cash flow is going to need to look like over the next several months is the most important step. And then having just a good dialogue with your bank about what those needs are going to look like before you take on any lending and alternative arrangement is super important. So thank you for that. I know there's also been a lot of information related to the nonprofit space. So can you talk about what are some of the key points related to what we need to know with respect to nonprofits?
Sure. I'll cover three things that were revealed in the release of the nonprofit term sheets. And if you look back to the other facilities, the term sheet is just the beginning of the process. There'll probably be, after the review and comment process, some revised term sheets that may come out. But I'll start with what we know today. And that is, first, they added those additional nonprofit facilities to the existing facilities in the overall Main Street lending program. And so the terms are essentially the same as those previously announced facilities. So when you look at the rate, the maturity, the principal payment schedule, deferment options, things like that, they're the same as the other programs. And for me, in my opinion, that was a disappointment because I expected those loan terms to better align with the perceived needs of the nonprofit industry and what their recovery looks like. And while I understand you can't design a single facility that'll work for all nonprofits, I would hope to see some tailoring based on outreach and comment letters on those initial term sheets. Second is loan sizing and eligibility requirements. Those were altered for nonprofits versus the existing facilities. While the loan sizing minimums and maximums are essentially the same as those previously announced facilities, the maximum cap for the nonprofit facilities is average quarterly 2019 revenues. So think just taking one quarter or 25% of your 2019 revenue, and that's the loan cap. From a sizing perspective. And then they added a bunch of eligibility requirements that in addition to what they had for the existing facilities, and there are some ratios associated with that. So I'll just cover a few of those. There's 7 of them that I'll cover today. One is that the business must be established. It must be about 5.5 years old versus the other facilities where you could have a younger borrower in terms of maturity of the business. You have to be established prior to January 1, 2015 for the nonprofit facilities. You have to have at least 50 employees. There's an endowment measurement. The endowment has to be less than $3 billion. And then there's some ratios of liquid assets to average daily expenses, and that in terms of days has to be 90 days, greater than 90 days or equal to. Unrestricted cash and investments to debt of 65% or greater. A ratio of adjusted EBITDA, no T in there, no taxes, but to unrestricted operating revenue of less than 5%. I'm sorry, greater than 5%, I think, on that. And then the ratio of donations to total revenues is a 30% threshold. And so I think, lastly, I would add that by rolling these out under the same facility as the others, I think it's reasonable to assume that the nonprofit borrowers may experience some of the same frustrations as their for-profit counterparts. And so I would expect, for the reasons I covered before, kind of a lukewarm rollout if there aren't some changes to this facility as well.
Well, we really appreciate you providing the updates both on the nonprofit and just on how this program is progressing. So we'll keep you around as we get questions throughout today's session on the inbox, and certainly keep you coming to future sessions as we continue to get more developments on the Main Street lending. So thank you for joining us today. We are now going to pivot and bring in Jack and Rick to talk more about PPP and forgiveness. So just to kick it off today, Monday we got a big IFR that we started to unpack Tuesday. And really the questions have just been pouring in at this point related to the easy form as well as the time period related to forgiveness. So Rick, let's start with you giving us an overview of just some of the high points that we got from the IFR Monday night, as well as where things stand with Form EZ.
Yeah, that sounds great, Leslie. I know Jack talked a little bit about this in some detail on Tuesday, so I'm going to try to hit some of the highlights here just so that we keep them front of mind as we're going through this. So one big piece of news that we received is that the SBA officially stated that borrowers can apply before the end of the covered period. Now, it's important to note, and often this causes confusion, that this doesn't actually change your covered period. That remains either 8 weeks or 24 weeks, but this does give borrowers some additional flexibility. It means that you don't necessarily need to wait until the end of 2020 to apply if you had a 24-week period. The challenge, though, is that we don't yet have much of the practicalities of applying before the end of the covered period. So we still need to understand a little bit more about what that looks like for certain situations. The SBA did provide instructions for wage reductions if you're applying early, but they haven't explained at all how to treat an FTE reduction if you apply in the middle of your covered period. Another key item that we learned from the IFR is limitations on owners. Now, the SBA has been publishing owner limits in bits and pieces over the past few weeks here. We just learned one tiny bit of information at a time. So this IFR really was the most comprehensive guidance that we've gotten to date. And we are getting a little bit closer to understanding what SBA means when they use a new term that they threw at us a few weeks back, owner-employee. So in addition to self-employed and general partners, which they've been more specific about, SBA has stated that owner-employees does include both S and C Corp owners. So we now seem to know the basic entity types that are subject to those limits, but they haven't really addressed anything deeper than the surface level issue. And I know I get a lot of questions, and all of us get a lot of questions about changes in ownership, situations with spouses, parents, kids, and other more complicated equity arrangements. And unfortunately, we really don't know what the SBA intends at this point. The last key point, and I really think this is one of the biggest items that they put in here, relates to the FTE safe harbor for reductions in business activity. Now, this potentially applies if borrowers can document in good faith that the reduction in business activity during the covered period stems directly or indirectly from compliance with COVID requirements or guidance. That word indirectly is a key addition that we didn't have before, and it certainly provides borrowers some flexibility. The SBA does provide us an example, but as with much of PPP, though, we're still living in a little bit of a world of gray with some blurry lines here. So it's hard to know exactly what situations fall on which side of the SBA's line with this. Our hope, though, is that many borrowers will get some much needed relief because of the wording they're starting to use around the certification.
Well, thank you for that overview. I think that was really helpful to clarify some of those points. Certainly, most of those clarifications, I think, are very borrower friendly. And so as we continue to get clarification, we'll continue to share that with everyone so that you can continue to incorporate that into your strategies and certainly forgiveness applications. With that, Jack, I'd like to ask you a question because we've got a big date coming up on the calendar, and that is the 6/30 deadline for PPP lending. It is so hard to believe that that deadline is upon us. And so in light of that deadline, when should people plan to submit applications if they still want to take advantage of this loan?
Yeah, I mean, you really need to be getting that into your bank either today or tomorrow if you think about it, right? So there's still over $100 billion left in the program, at least that based on what was reported through June 20th. And so still plenty of funds available under the program. But the flow of applications has really slowed dramatically over the last, let's say, 3 to 4 weeks. And so that's only really growing by about $1 billion a week right now in terms of loans that are being approved. But, you know, if you're going to work with your bank, the bank has to approve your application, get it submitted into the SBA, and then the SBA has to approve it by the end of business on Monday the 30th. And so you really need to get that application in this week to allow that, because our understanding is if your application, even if it's in the queue, if it's not approved by the end of the day on the 30th, the SBA is prohibited from approving any loan guarantees after that date.
Yeah, and of course, it'll be so interesting to see what happens after this date with unallocated funds, with potentially another allocation, but the answer is we just don't know, right?
Yeah, we don't really know what's going to happen there, although, you know, we're already seeing a number of other programs that are out there that might be part of CARES, 4.0 type scenario, there's one out there for the restaurant called the Restaurants Act. That's looking to allocate $120 billion to restaurants specifically. I guess that makes some of these future programs a little bit easier if we've got unallocated funds under the PPP that could be, repositioned out there. So we will see, though. At this point, we don't know if there's going to be any extensions. They had actually talked about potentially allowing existing borrowers to expand their loan a little bit. Obviously, that didn't come to pass before this June 30th deadline, but there will be another round of COVID relief legislation out there. So I'm sure these funds will go to good use.
Well, as with everything, it'll be certainly exciting for all of us to watch and see what happens with that. All right. Well, as we mentioned at the beginning, we love your questions. It really does help us drive content to you guys and help us answer what's really on your mind and important. So we're going to dig in now to questions that have come in leading up to the live stream as well as during our session today. The first question we want to address has come in from Jeff. So his question is a multifaceted question, and it starts with the fact that he said he knows his application is due 30 days after the end of the covered period. Over the 8-week period, he's used up almost 75% of the requirement for payroll and would have basically only a relatively small portion of the loan that wouldn't be forgiven. If he opted for the 24-week period, the 2.5-month time frame would almost entirely use the loan amount for payroll costs. Other eligible costs would really use up the rest of the balance. So his questions are this: can he file for forgiveness after he's used the entire covered loan amount, even if they haven't gotten through that whole 24-week period? And then also, there's a lot of references throughout all of this to 2019 wages in the calculation. So what's that all about? And then finally, is that a limiter for employees with annual wages under the 100,000? So, phew, lots of questions there.
Yeah.
Take it away.
Yeah, so let me try to take a few of those things out of there and respond, because we are seeing a lot of questions very similar to this. So, the first part of that, you made the reference to that the forgiveness application is due within 30 days. Now, that might be a requirement in your loan documentation, but there is no requirement in either the CARES Act or, the PPP Flexibility Act that requires an application to be filed within 30 days. So you do have a requirement that if you do not file a forgiveness application within 10 months of the end of your covered period, you have to start servicing your loan or paying your loan back. But that's the only kind of requirement that's actually in the CARES Act or subsequent legislation. So that 30-day requirement might be in the loan document itself. And there you would either look at potentially either the 8-week or the 24-week period, depending on what the loan provides for you there. So the second question you had that was kind of baked into there is, when can we apply for loan forgiveness? And as Rick mentioned earlier today, that IFR that came out on Monday really gives us flexibility, right? While the covered periods themselves are either the 8-week or the 24-week period, Treasury has clearly said that once you've used the loan proceeds and you've spent everything that you're going to ask for forgiveness for, that you can go ahead and apply for forgiveness. And that application date is important, because the application date is when you have to meet some of the safe harbors and everything. So not having to wait till December 31st, for instance, to meet those safe harbors is an important piece of the application process that was put in place now. So a couple good things there to think about, but you can apply for forgiveness before the end of the 24-week period. The last piece that we'll deal with in your question here has to do with the 2019 wages references, right? And there's really kind of two areas that 2019 wages come into play. So the first one has to do with the wage reduction test. And I think that's what maybe your question was referring to. And so what you do is you look back at the 2019 wages for your employee base that's still there during the covered period, but that was also with you during 2019. And for those folks that made over $100,000 in 2019, you do not have to worry about the wage reduction test. Again, that wage reduction test is the one where you have to compare wages during the covered period to your January 1st through March 31st quarter. And if you reduced wages by more than 25%, then you could have a reduction in the forgiveness amount as a result of that. So that's very important that that 2019 reference relates to that. Now, the other place that 2019 compensation comes into play has to do with owner compensation limits. And so whether you're an owner employee of a C Corp or an S Corporation, Schedule C filer, or a partner, all of those references go back to 2019 amounts. And so you're limited based on either the $100,000 or your actual 2019 amount, be it your W-2 or your Schedule C or your K-1. And so that's where the other place that reference to 2019 comes into play. So hopefully that clarified, a few of those, items for you there, and where 2019 in particular comes into play in the forgiveness calculations.
No, that was great. I mean, I think it clarifies a lot of common questions we're getting. And we got another one that Shari asked that is a really good question, frequently asked, related to headcount reduction. So what she's asking is related to the 3058 Easy form, and it's really related to the fact that now there's this whole concept of, did the borrower reduce annual salary or hourly wages of any employee by more than 25%? And did they reduce the number of employees by the end of the covered period? And her specific fact pattern is that she lost 2 employees in May. One was terminated for performance and one voluntarily quit. So there's certainly some exceptions in the above statement based on the fact that they didn't voluntarily choose to reduce employees. Certainly there are some carve-outs when you have to terminate for cause, and they also have hired another person. But based on that, what are the rules with using the EZ form and then documentation? And Rick, maybe you've got some thoughts around that. It's a little hairy.
Yeah, I'm happy to try to talk through that. And from the information in the question, I'd say the short answer is maybe. And so maybe I'll just explain a little bit more information so that we can start to unpack that a little and apply it. So the EZ form really is a fantastic option that they gave to borrowers. It greatly simplifies the information you need to report, takes out a lot of the specific calculations that you need to turn in related to FTEs and wages. But there are 3 certifications, and you have to meet at least one of those 3 to be able to use the EZ form. And so this question refers to one of those 3, where you don't reduce wages by more than 25%, and essentially you maintain your FTEs from January 1st through the end of your covered period. Now, there are a couple of exceptions that they specifically give on the EZ form for that certification, where they say, if these apply, you can ignore them for the purposes of that certification. It doesn't specifically mention for that purpose terminations where a borrower left those unfulfilled. But that said, the full application does give a little bit more expansive definition of FTE reduction exceptions. And that would include when somebody is fired for cause. So that might be appropriate then to apply that same logic to the EZ form application too. Who knows what's in the SBA's head, but it certainly might be appropriate to use that same logic. And at the end of the day, you'd end up getting to the same answer in terms of the forgiveness amount. However, it is worth noting that, in the question, I think it was noted they were terminated for performance. Terminated for cause is a pretty specific term in the HR world and typically requires some sort of grave misconduct. My understanding, at least, is that would go beyond just normal performance issues. So it's definitely worth making sure you meet that definition of for cause before you go down that route, because otherwise there are other requirements in place to try to fulfill that position and have documentation around that to be able to count them.
Those are some great points. Thank you for that response, Rick. So Susan has submitted something. She is a sole proprietor, and we've got a lot of those in our client base, and she's asked the following. So she received her PPP loan April 21st, and she's going to go under the 24-week path. She wonders if she's got to start using the money on the date she received the loan back in April, and does she have to pay herself for any of the 2.5 months leading up to the December 31st deadline? She's trying to figure out, really, does she not double dip? How does she maximize her benefits here?
Yeah, maybe I can take a crack at that. There's interplay obviously for a sole proprietor between your unemployment benefits and what you'd be eligible for there and the PPP program, right? And so you do want to look at the two of those together to make sure that, during this period of time when you're not able to work and provide services and therefore earn a living, that you're going to maximize the benefit. What I would probably suggest is that if you're in a period of time at the inception of your PPP loan where you can't work, right? And clearly you would qualify for your state's unemployment assistance, right? If you could do that, then it would probably be, now that we know we've got a 24-week period, it would probably be in your best interest to use the unemployment benefits that would be available to you for some period of time. However, at some point, hopefully within that 24-week period, you are going to be able to start resuming your activities to some degree. And at that point, you might not any longer be available to take advantage of the state's unemployment benefits, right? And so at that point, then you could take over and start paying yourself, so to speak, out of that 24-week period, using the PPP loan proceeds, right? And if you think about it, as long as you're spending roughly 10 weeks into that 24 weeks of compensation under the PPP program, you wouldn't be double dipping, right? So really what we're talking about maybe is 14 weeks on unemployment benefits, and then another 10 weeks that would get covered by the PPP. That takes you out the full 24 weeks. Now, the other way to do it would be just do the 10 weeks on the PPP right away if your unemployment benefits could kick in after that and might extend beyond 24 weeks. And so that would be dependent on really your state's laws around that and how you could maximize that. So there definitely is some interplay there. The 24-week period does give you some flexibility. Just remember, though, as a business owner, assuming you made more than $100,000 last year, the maximum benefit you're going to get for PPP forgiveness is $20,833, which if you were a sole proprietor, that's likely your loan amount. So you could exhaust that pretty quickly, again, within 10 weeks, and then jump into the unemployment benefits as long as you were not going to return to work during that period of time.
Well, that's a really good, helpful strategy. Thanks for laying that out. We do have a Main Street lending question that's come in, so I want to bring Todd back in for that. So Todd, this seems to be lender focused and says most of the inquiries we've gotten on Main Street lending programs are from customers that just want a low rate and relaxed repayment terms. So they aren't necessarily stressed from the pandemic. They really just are viewing this as a cheap source of cash. So the real heart of the question is, do you know how this will be viewed by the Fed if they process these loans that don't really have a COVID cause need?
Yeah, Leslie, while I don't know what the Fed would actually think, but I sense that that's not a concern at this point, would be the link to the pandemic results. What I think, though, is while it looks like a cheap source of funds at this point, if you follow through with the program and really look at the terms and the continued reporting and monitoring that goes along with it, there is a cost. It may seem like a hidden cost because it's not a cash outflow cost, but there is a cost to this program that I think the sense amongst lenders would be that good borrowers who would be in that situation might tire of those reporting requirements or those restrictions or those certifications, or more may have a business event that causes them to want more flexibility in terms of either repaying other debt or taking on additional debt, and the interaction between that existing or additional debt and the Main Street loan in terms of, say, priority and security or how you can make your payments, that might frustrate borrowers and cause them to then exit the Main Street program and get a more conventional loan. That, I think, is more the thinking right now than the link to the pandemic cost.
Okay, well, that's good strategies really for both lenders and borrowers to consider as everybody's thinking about how they're going to use liquidity here in the next couple of years. So thank you for that. We've also had a question come in that, Jack, I know you've had some discussions related to with our national tax group on. And so somebody is asking, is there any guidance on preparation of 2020 tax return regarding loan forgiveness? Because you may not know that, there was an amount deemed forgiven by the SBA before the filing due date. That's especially true now with this 24 weeks, and then we back into the forgiveness time frame, and before we know it, we're pretty stretched out. So what is the thought process here?
Yeah, I mean, we are hopeful we get some guidance on this one, because the way the IRS has interpreted this, they've taken code section 265, and which basically says, if you have tax exempt income and that pays certain expenses, those expenses are non-deductible. But, what we are seeing is it is likely that people won't know what their tax exempt income, the PPP forgiveness, is during 2020, but they're going to have paid all of those expenses. What would really be a good way to solve this problem is allow those deductions on the 2020 tax return. And then in 2021, when forgiveness gets determined, then you would have to add those back, right? So you'd get the benefit of the deduction currently because you don't have certainty as to what the forgiveness amount's going to be. We don't know the right answer on that yet, though, and so I suspect that Treasury over the remaining part of the year will come out with guidance. And that all presupposes that Congress doesn't act, right? Mm-hmm. We know that Congress has said that there's an intention that these things would have been deductible. And so in the next round of, CARES legislation, if we do get that overturns the IRS guidance around, IRC 265, then this will all become a moot point and those costs will be expensed regardless of forgiveness. So more to come on that one. That is one, though, that we are monitoring pretty closely because it could have a big impact on, current year tax payments and obviously what happens in 2021.
Absolutely. Well, unfortunately, that's all the time we have for today. So we really appreciate all of the questions that have come in from all of our guests today and everybody who submitted questions in advance of the sessions. I want to thank Jack, Rick, and Todd for all of your support and great information you've provided today. We'd like to remind all of our viewers to continue to visit our COVID-19 landing page at claconnect.com for more information on PPP forgiveness, as well as all of the other continual updates on information that we'll be providing on all of the hot topics that we have related to COVID-19. We also have a lot of up-to-date information out there related to forgiveness tools and just other up-to-date information. Also, feel free to take a moment to subscribe to our emails so that we can continue to share up-to-date information with you as it comes out, including the forgiveness tool and any other new developments that continue to arise real time. Please continue to send us any questions you have. We'll continue to check in with those. We'll continue to build those into our sessions. And we also just want to take a moment to thank you for watching, for sticking with us. We hope you all have a safe and wonderful weekend. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Leslie.